Why do some people prefer backing into a parking space? I've heard people say that they prefer backing into a parking space because it's really easy to pull out of the space when they want to leave. But this logic doesn't make sense to me. It's really easy to back out of a parking space. It's barely an inconvenience. Whereas, it can be tricky to back into a parking space. You need to thread a needle going backwards. From my perspective, back-in parkers are choosing to pull off a tricky maneuver in order to avoid something that's no big deal. Isn't it a much bigger hassle to back in than to back out? Am I missing something? Backing into a parking spot is not a complicated maneuver. It's actually often easier to back into a spot, especially tight spots, because of the way the steering geometry works. It's why a lot of vehicles that need to operate in tight quarters use rear steering like a forklift. Backing in does the backwards low visibility part of the process when you don't really have to worry about surprises. You can see into the spot. Not like a car is suddenly going to appear. Head-in parking does the low visibility part of the process when cars, pedestrians come by. Much more dangerous. When I worked for Spectrum, we had to back into parking spaces for safety reasons. When you do that 5 days a week, for 8 hours a day, it sort of just becomes your norm. In parking lots, people are walking all over the place, but not in parking spots generally. So backing in means you back into spot that's clear of pedestrians. But backing out of a spot means you have to back out into an area full of other cars and pedestrians. Much less of a hassle to back into the spot. It's not tricky maneuver at all, especially with a backup cam. It takes like seconds. Because it's stupendously easy to back into a parking space and it allows you way better visibility. On the way out, it's generally much safer to do this. I'm not sure if it's the same at other companies, but my brother had to back into parking spaces because of rules around his company car. Backing into a space shouldn't be a tricky maneuver, lol. Safer. Not difficult. Better if your battery runs out, can't push an automatic. Mandatory in many countries. People are used to it. It's easier to look out for traffic when leaving. Also, because of the wheelbase differential in forward vehicles, which most commercial vehicles are backing into a space, allows for tighter turns, whereas going forward requires you to follow a wider arc. In places with parking space is scarce, there are times when it's actually physically impossible to park forward, but possible in reverse. It used to be known as gangster parking for quick getaways back in the 1930s. I really don't care how I park so long as other cars don't hit me. Backing in assures that you can exit easily even if traffic is erratic or if your neighbors park like assholes. It is more easier park backwards for me. Easy to get in or to get out. Less likely to be in an accident. I used to work for an insurance company. Well over 90% of all accidents that happen in a parking lot or when leaving one's driveway are the driver backing into someone. Reversing into a space is much safer than reversing out of a space. You're carrying out the reversing maneuver with full visibility of the road, other traffic and pedestrians. Reversing out of a space always has the potential to cause disruption to other road users, particularly if you have bad visibility due to larger vehicles, vans etc. parked next to you. It's literally safer. It's the way any driving school teaches you to do it. If you pull straight in, you now have to back out into an area you cannot see. People and cars are crossing and you've got cars on both sides, so you can't see because you're surrounded by the other cars. Meanwhile, people backing in can be reasonably assured there's no obstacle or person standing in the space and they have full view when they leave. Backing out of a car park between two 4WDs whilst people are walking around is a safety risk in my view. It's also easier to get the shopping trolley to the boot if you don't need to snake it between cars. Backing in means you are not stood in traffic as you load the car. So, when I had a pickup it was a huge help. And after that I've had cars with fairly long noses. Especially with a camera. Backing in is pretty simple. Backing out I'm watching my front, behind me, pedestrians, and any cross traffic. I much prefer reducing the number of angles to watch, as I just can't count on the situational awareness of everyone else. Plus, while I'm gone, somebody could park really close or at a funny angle that requires a 68-point turn to wiggle out of the spot backwards. If I back in, it's just drive away. It's just as easy to pull into a parking space backward as it is to pull in forward if you're used to it. And it's as easy as or easier than backing out. I do this at events like concerts. Easier to avoid pedestrians that are all exiting an event and walking through the parking lot at the same time. It's opposite for me. I find it easy to reverse into a park but hate reversing out when I can't see the cars coming behind me. Depending on what you're driving, it's also easier to park by backing in. When you're backing up you are essentially using rear steering. A long vehicle like a pickup might not be able to easily pull into a space without the radius becoming too tight and striking the car next to it, but can easily back in. When you back in you can increase the radius by swinging the nose. It's a habit I got into back when I would do crimes and shit. It's only a few seconds difference, but it's a real psychological advantage. I'm an expert at backing in perfectly between the lines since I use my mirrors to line up all in one smooth motion. Pulling in I'm the asshole that's over one side or on angle that I have to adjust 2 or 3 times, or I say F it. I used to work for UPS. If you go to a UPS facility and look at their parking lot, everyone parks head out. All the drivers are trained to park that way because it's been statistically proven by their industrial engineers to be much safer. Most fender benders are caused when backing out of a parking space. Head-out parking avoids those problems when parking. There are no cars crossing in the rear to back into, so the driver is in complete control and it's much safer. You're either backing out when you enter or when you leave. Much safer to back in. Assuming there are other cars. There will likely be pedestrians wandering about. You can check the parking space properly. Then use your mirrors to back in safely. Backing out into the road. You can't see anything properly, so you're always more likely to hit a car or pedestrian. I'm assuming supermarket car park or similar, where the cars drive slowly and the people just wander about. You sacrifice visibility on entry. You gain fine steering control on entry as well as visibility on exit. In one of my old jobs we had a staff car park. If there was a fire, it was much easier to evacuate if all cars were able to just drive out of their spot without the need to be looking behind them. I guess after being there a few years it just became something I always did. I also don't have a garage on my house and I quite often need to parallel park down the street. When I first passed my test 9 years ago I was terrified of having the parallel park as my maneuver on my test. Now I'd love to show off doing it.